Hey there, and welcome to the Dynamics Hot Dish Podcast, serving up stories and knowledge on Dynamics 365 and the Power Platform. This is What's Hot in Dynamics. You're now joining Merlin Schweiger, Liz McGlennon, and Ashley Steiner.
My first monarch hatch this morning.
Like butterfly?
Yes, like a butterfly.
So like, are you growing these indoors? Like I'm imagining like a terrarium, or is this just like in your yard?
So they're from my yard. I don't pull up the milkweed. I just let it grow. And then if I find caterpillars, sometimes I bring them inside and like raise them inside so that they don't die.
Interesting.
And
So
just
what-
Tupperware. It's nothing fancy. I need to get fancier because apparently if they grow up indoors, they have a harder time migrating to Mexico. And so I really should have something that can be outside for them.
So what drew this and like I've never heard of somebody like I don't know, kidnapping caterpillars and like taking them indoors to raise them.
I've always
This is
done
a
it
foreign
since I was a kid. Like since we did it in elementary school, I've just like done it on and off throughout the years. And now that I have a giant patch of milkweed, I resisted the urge earlier this summer because I was too busy. And then I saw some more and I was like, no, I'm going to raise a few. It's really cool to watch the process. Like it's actually really impressive, like the transformation they go through.
I mean, yeah. Would they not survive if you just left them outside?
I think like less than 5% of them survive.
Well, that's so
Oh.
sad to hear.
Yeah, things eat them.
Well, birds probably eat them a lot, I'm guessing.
Birds and insects, and yeah.
Fascinating.
That's cool. Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen a caterpillar in my yard.
Should
Sounds
grow
like I
some
need to-
milkweed. Do you have some sun?
I have lots of sun. My house faces south, so
Plant some milkweed.
okay.
You'll get a lot of monarchs.
I'll have to ask you later what that is.
It's the plant they eat.
I picked up that much. No idea what it looks like, or like,
I'll send you a picture. It's
Okay.
tall, it has big leaves, and it gives purple flowers.
oh, pretty.
It's,
Yeah.
yeah, it's not bad.
Yeah, and it's like the only thing that they can eat, I think, when they're caterpillars. So
Yep.
if there's no milkweed, then there are no monarchs.
Right. And there's a lot of different kinds. You want the common milkweed because I've never seen them grow on any of the other types before. Technically they do, but I don't really think it's true.
Interesting. I feel so like uneducated, but I feel like you guys just taught me so much.
Okay. What do you call a caterpillar poop? There's a-
Caterpillar poop? That's what I would call it.
Frass. There's a special name for it.
Rats.
Who
Yeah.
knows? Like, I'm sorry, off the top of their head, who knows this kind of stuff? I'm sorry, Liz. Like, that is just
Apparently Liz.
wow.
Yep, crazy monarch lady.
Well, on that bombshell, maybe we should transition to our topic for the day, which is, I'm going to call it lessons learned and focus less on the horror stories. We're not really going to talk about horror stories so much as things that went sideways that were probably preventable, or things that went sideways that are just for entertainment value. Yeah, who would like to start?
I'm gonna let Liz go first, but I did title like my notes that I was taking for this horror stories and not lessons learned. So
Yeah, I don't even know where to start. Like I'm thinking if I start in chronological order or just the thing that like comes up the most. I guess we'll do both. So if I start with my first project I ever did, I guess the biggest lessons learned from that was don't put every field in the world on the form. Ashley might remember it too, but just because like you think you want to track it doesn't mean that the salesperson's actually going to enter it, right? And
Mhm.
like if you're not going to use it for anything, don't ask them to put in the data. So that was definitely something I didn't know not to say no to at the time, but would now, of course, if someone asked for that. And then I think the other conflict I always see is that delivery likes to blame sales for poorly selling the project. Like the scope's wrong, the estimate's wrong, and that handoff I feel like is always pretty painful. And that's just across the board. Like I've seen that my whole career and heard that complaint the whole time from the delivery team of like sales didn't do a good job selling it, or they didn't hand it off well. And I've been on both sides too. And so I've seen it from kind of both perspectives. And I always compare it. Have either of you like worked in a restaurant or anything?
Yeah, I have.
I compare it to like the front of the house and the back of the house, how like the servers and the kitchen like hate each other, but they need each other. It's like that same sort of like tension of like you are dependent on each other, but there's a lot of conflict there.
I love that analogy, and I'm going to use that totally going forward in other situations.
It's true.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. That's actually a funny one that's come up relatively recently for us, since we're kind of a small team on the CRM side. Our salesperson has been periodically been involving some of the people off delivery on things. And he's like, see, it's not as easy. Like you think that this person's going to email you back. It seems like it's a done deal. And then they just go silent for 2 or 3 weeks. And you're like, I don't know what's happening. Are they still buying this? Are they not buying this? Or you like get on a call with a customer and try to ask them very concrete questions, because delivery people love concrete questions and concrete requirements. And they're like, I don't know. Sometimes it's this way. Sometimes it's that way. And you're like, well, okay, cool. And the delivery person's like, I need to know all of these details before I can give an estimate. I'm like, that's just not possible, man.
Cannot
Like,
take the time to do that in a sales cycle. We'll never close.
I'm gonna be
the
here all
deal.
year.
Yeah.
Like,
You should be
we're not
getting
gonna spend
paid
that
for
time.
that time.
Exactly. So I'm like, well, I just made up an estimate based on what I thought sounded reasonable. And they're like, how did you even do that? So it's a common pain.
So the first thing that you brought up, like that, like the fields on the form, like I have very limited experience with delivery and sales, 8 months worth. So I can't really comment on that. But like, I think it's all about confidence, like knowing that you can tell, like question people, like, are you sure? Because are you sure that's what you want to do? That was
Yeah.
definitely like something that I grew into, to be able to feel
Yes.
comfortable, to be like, you know,
I
to
definitely didn't
question.
ask why or say no ever,
Mm.
like for my first project.
And even
It's the
now it's
easiest thing.
intimidating.
It's the easiest thing to ask. Why?
I don't know. It's intimidating
Why do
though,
you
because
want
like
that?
sometimes you talk to like a VP of sales and they're like, well, this is just how we run our business and you need to like make the accommodation. And I'm like, well, but
I think if you're like really new to it, like, yeah, it's tough. And you don't have any experience or confidence to like back up asking why or pushing back at all.
That's fair. I feel like you can always, though, you can kind of play the ignorance card, like I'm not sure that I understand. Could you tell me, like, what are you doing with this data so that I make sure I architect it correctly, and then sort of make them explain themselves that way. You'd be like, but it sounds like you could get that information from this other field that we're already capturing. I don't understand how this is different. Can you help me? Like, I don't know, play dumb and get to it that way? No, maybe.
I didn't have anyone to coach me on, like, that was the way to approach it.
right. And that's what it, like, I think the confidence part, or like new people coming in, like you're going to grow into it. You know, it's very rare to have somebody coach you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. I do like the put all these fields on the form. I feel like this is a common pitfall of like business analysis or requirements gathering. People are like, well, and I'd really like to be able to track this and this and this and this and this. And you're like, oh, okay, sure, we can track all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
And then,
Yeah, do you track it today? No. Okay.
well, I'd really like to.
Yeah, because the salesperson is going to magically fill out like 100 fields every time they enter an account or contact or opportunity.
Uh-huh.
And then if you create like something with all those required, because if it's not required, they're not filling it in. But if you make it all required, they'll just stop using it.
They put in just junk
put in
data.
junk.
Mhm.
Yeah. No, I always go like the most minimum required fields possible. Like,
Or even just the least amount of fields.
yeah.
Yep.
Have
Yep.
you guys ever seen someone max out the field limit for an empty or on a form?
I didn't know you could.
Yeah. So I was not on the project, but I had a friend that was, and he said the form would take like minutes to load. They put 1,000 fields on a form.
Like in all the tabs, like is it in the UI, new UI that they
It was
did it, or
in
the-
2011.
Okay.
I think. Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
wonder how that, if like the tabs make
So
a
if
difference.
the
Still,
tabs
please,
were
people do not do 1,000
collapsed.
fields.
If the tabs were collapsed, it would load a little faster. You know how you used to be able to
Mhm.
tell, yeah, but it was still just like horrendous.
That's crazy.
Yeah. It's
Why-
the
why
only
would-
project I've ever heard of that happening on.
I can't imagine why anyone would need 1,000 fields for anything. That's nope. Nope. If
That's
you've got 1,000
insane.
fields, you're doing it wrong. Something has gone wrong.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah. I saw a CRM once, to your point about required fields, where they decided after the fact to make the industry on an account required so that people would fill in the industry. And after, 6 to 8 months or whatever of that field being required and people going and filling it in, I think at least 80% of the accounts were in other industry
Mhm.
or whatever the A one was that was at the top, because
Accounting.
Yeah.
the sales user
Just
would
the
hit the
first one.
account, be like, I just need to change the phone number. Oh, that's right. This new field is required. Save and close. Like
How long ago was that?
2-3 years.
See, if there's an other option now, I like to use business rules to make them put in notes and require that like conditionally. But
Sure, that makes
yeah,
sense.
That's actually a good idea. I've never thought to do that.
yeah, I do that anytime there's an other. Force
That's a good
them
idea.
to explain why they picked other.
You're just going to end up with everybody in aerospace instead.
Good try.
Yeah. What else do you
I'd
have on
say-
your list?
Yeah, I was gonna say one of the biggest lessons that I've learned is understanding requirements. And when I say that, I mean understanding what technology requirements Microsoft requires you to have when you're using their products. So when you think about it, like you have to have a certain level of Windows, you have to have your servers, like if you're using anything like the Exchange, you have to have Exchange, server versus, you know what I mean. I don't know what they are right now because I don't have to worry about them. The reason that's important is because I went through a project where we were using technology like an email router, and server-side sync was available, but nobody understood the requirements of server-side sync. And they're like, well, we're on premise, we can't use it. And I'm like, well, there is there is a way that we could use it on prem and use it in a hybrid situation, but nobody had like gone to those. And so we were like, I remember this 136-hour straight phone call with Microsoft because our email router went down and would not come back up. We were on the call for 36 hours. It was horrible.
That sounds
And-
like a
and-
nightmare.
And we walked out of that and I said, we're moving to server-side sync. Like you guys, like I know we can do it. We might have to upgrade a server, but that is so much better than being on these calls. So that is a huge lesson learned for me, but I think just for anybody is like understand those requirements of like Windows and servers and versions of Outlook to use the Outlook app and things like that. That was a huge, that was horrible.
And that's
Speaking
important
of,
to the like older stuff, right? Like making sure you
Mhm.
don't just, oh, it's been working for the last 6 years, so it must just keep working. Like eventually it's not gonna. Sorry, go ahead, please.
no, I was gonna say, since we're talking about email, the old Outlook client, like customers are still on that if you haven't upgraded. And so
I
it's just
thought
like
it was
I had forgotten
deprecated.
about it. I just talked to someone that's still on it. And I like hadn't had to like have that discussion in probably a year or two. And I'm like, oh yeah, the new app is a lot better. But have you guys ever tried to uninstall the Outlook client to get the new
Mhm.
app deployed? And that can be such a nightmare. Like it's
Mhm.
different per machine. Like some machines it's like no problem. And then other ones it's like you cannot get it to like cleanly uninstall.
Well, that's like the whole problem with the Outlook client in general is that it's a machine by machine thing. Like you have to load it and install it on every single machine.
And it would
And
break
so-
all the time.
Yep. But it would break on some people all the time, but other people's would have no, like I
Yeah.
never had problems.
And it would make Outlook so slow too.
Right. But
Yeah.
like I would do it for testing and whatever, never had any issues. But man, you get a salesperson in there and like their junked up laptop that they're thrown everywhere and it just stops working. And so I honestly didn't even know you could download the Outlook client anymore.
Well, yeah. I mean, think about if you're on an older version of CRM on-prem.
Yep.
I guess.
The Outlook client.
I guess
really,
I don't think of that often.
This particular client is on 2011 on-prem. So
Oh, well, they're definitely still using the old Outlook client.
Correct.
I feel like the Outlook client is its own horror story.
It's true.
Like from the inception of the Outlook client, Microsoft has always been like, no, this version is better than the last. No, this version is better than the last. And it to their credit, each version was better than the last, and all of them were junk.
But like that level that they had to build up from was so low
It really
that
was.
like, yeah,
They
I mean, like
fixed it though. Like it's not a problem anymore.
The
app or the
app
client?
now.
No, the
oh yeah,
app
no,
is
the
great.
app is wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, the app
Yeah,
is great
right.
because it's all cloud-based and
Yeah.
download it.
Yeah.
It's awesome. Yeah.
No, the client has always been a mess. It's always been like there's that one guy's machine that just like for whatever reason hates the Outlook client and it won't install, and then it won't uninstall, and then you got to go and delete all the files, and you got to clean up the registry by hand, and it's just
Yes. Yeah. So I've seen like last resort to get rid of the client is to just reimage. Like seriously.
What?
just like re-image the machine.
Yeah.
Re-image. Oh yeah.
I mean, that's the nuclear option.
Aren't you gonna lose everything though? Like that's horrible.
Presumably you back your stuff up
Yeah.
first.
Oh, okay, I guess. Still.
If it's the only way
Wow.
to get the app to work.
The Outlook client. It's for the days.
So can we talk about like kind of like, I guess, running a project? Because I've been on projects where like the roles are not clearly defined, and like, or there's no project manager, and those never go as smoothly as they could.
100% agree. Once I went to a class for the Microsoft SureStep methodology, which for a while was the method that they recommended you implement Dynamics. And in that, the trainer guy was like, you cannot effectively project manage a project and be doing work in the project because it requires two different perspectives, and you're either in the details or you're looking at the big picture, and it's almost impossible to like switch between those effectively. And so it's like, even if it's just like a little bit of somebody else's time every week to just like check in on the big picture, it's very important to have a project manager, just somebody being like, how are we doing? Like, by the way, this is your budget that's left. Because when you're just working on stuff, like you're just heads down working on it, and you're like, oh, I'm 100 hours over budget. How did that happen?
So, and I know I've said this before, and I'm sure I've said it on the podcast in one of our, I wish I knew which one. But as important as it is to have a PM, like a project manager, the consultant, one of the biggest lessons that I've ever learned is that you should also have a project manager on your own side. The customer should always have somebody, just like you said, Merlin, like checking in on dates, on, hours, on like the resource time internally. Because I mean, a project is not just a consultant going out and like doing all this work. It does take internal resources. And if you have to like get more internal resources, like that's a perfect job for like a PM to do, especially because they're not physically touching the project. So that's one of the biggest lessons I've learned.
Speaking of internal,
bringing that up.
Yeah, you have. Speaking of internal resources, having just someone that's accountable for the system too. Like I've delivered projects where there's no one to hand it off to at the end. And it's like the consulting team's not going to stick around forever. Like we cannot be your internal admin. We cannot be your support. Like someone from the customer side, client side has to at least assign someone part-time to be the owner of the system, the admin.
I mean, I have an offering for that, but
or hire a consultant, a partner that has that service. But like if you're just straight time and materials and you ended the project, like you're only going to get support or hypercare for so long, and at some point like they take over or participate. If you do hire someone, like it's not like the partner doesn't work for your business. Like you still have to spend time collaborating with the partner if you're buying services like that.
Yeah,
I'd say that like that goes along with that is the easiest thing to cut out of like your SOW or your scope is training. Like, oh, I need to cut like 20 hours out of this project to get it down. And everybody always goes for those training hours first. Cause like, like training will just figure itself out when we get there. And that my biggest advice is don't touch those training hours. Do you need all 20? Do you need all 50? Maybe not, but like, you're going to need something. And unless you are just wholly 100% taking that on internally at your company, which I know very few end user companies that could actually do that, that's like not where you want to cut your project is the training.
I have that on my list too. That's a big
Yeah.
one. That happens way too often.
Yep. Well, and I see it on the sales side too. To your point, people are like, well, this is a little bit high, but you got all this time in here for training. Well, we'll figure that out. You know, Ashley's real smart. She'll just train all the users. And
Yep.
Since we're using analogies this episode, I feel like my favorite analogy there is that like the training and potentially like change management kind of training around that is like the insurance policy for your implementation. Like you're going to spend however much, let's say you're going to spend $100,000 implementing your system, but you're not going to spend that extra like 10 grand to make sure that people actually use it. Like if nobody ends up using it, then you've just thrown $100,000 into a pit.
Yeah.
And it's just going to languish there for 2 years until you throw another $100,000 into that pit 2 years later to like implement something else. Like you gotta make sure people use it.
It's better to get it right the first time because like those end users are going to have a bad experience and remember the fact that you've tried this before too. So it's going to be harder the next time to be successful because of that stigma of, oh, here's another system. Like, let's see if it works this time.
Right. It's the old system of the month. Oh,
Yeah.
I don't know what system it'll be this month.
Yep. But yeah, like to your point, really, like you wouldn't buy a car or a house without getting insurance for it.
It's true.
Okay, so
Seriously,
question.
loving all these comparisons. Sorry, I'm like just so wrapped up in all the things that Merlin has been able to compare.
What else has he compared?
He did the other one early. I don't remember which one.
No, that was the restaurant thing.
I think that was
the
Merlin's
restaurant
first
thing.
one.
Yeah, it was the restaurant one. Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. I was gonna ask, have either of you like had to work physically in a horrible spot or had anything with like logistics that have happened?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Other than having to sit at my desk all night during the old upgrade process that Microsoft had.
You couldn't work from home?
I mean, all the technology and stuff was like I would have had just a laptop, and sometimes that's hard to do an upgrade on, especially the way that you used to have to do it. So other than that, and like listening to everybody go to the bars at 2 a.m. and stuff, that was fun. Because I worked downtown.
No, I feel like I've had some pretty crappy desks, and like usually if you're a consultant and you go on site to work, like you get sort of shunted into the extra space with that old chair that nobody in the office wants because it's, you know, basically made out of rocks, but they're like, well, we still got the chair, we'll just put it here by this desk. Like that's the consultant spot. Like you can just perch there on that thing.
Yeah.
I mean, nothing too terrible. Like nobody set me up on like cardboard boxes. Have you?
No, I've never had a cardboard box. I was on a staff aug project and I was basically in a closet. It had 2 tables and no windows. It was interior and there were like up to 6 of us in there. And you like couldn't even get out. Like you had to like ask the person next to you to leave so that you could get out of the room to like go to the bathroom or get something to drink or whatever. And that for an extended
awful.
period of time is not super enjoyable.
Makes it hard to like focus on your work. Right?
Yeah.
And, like,
Yeah.
because I feel like you have to have a comfortable working environment.
There was definitely, it was hardly ever quiet in there because like people were collaborating.
Yeah.
Maybe that'll be less of a thing now post-pandemic.
Let's hope.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never had to work in like a tough spot. I guess that I've always been at the end user though, and they put you up pretty nice when you work at the company.
Yeah, no. Consultants usually get the icky spot to sit, the leftover stuff. The bad laptops too, like usually some places give you good stuff, but usually you get the leftover stuff.
So one of the things, like the lesson, sorry, just to like keep going, I'm so passionate about this next one though, is like keeping a good relationship. I think it's our last, we talked about negotiation a couple podcasts ago, super important, but I also think that as the person doing the negotiating typically is not the person working on the project. You have somebody else in your department, or maybe it's even in IT, whatever, that's doing the negotiating. And sometimes you're just in it to save nickels and dimes, that you forget that like after you negotiate, you then have to work with these people, and your internal people have to work with them. And I've seen it actually happen in real life where a company felt like they got nickel and dime, still agreed to it because they didn't want to lose the business. And then they'll say things afterwards like, well, you know, you guys nickel and dimed us through this entire process, or the contract negotiation went on really long, so I don't know if we can do that for you. So they use it against you later, because usually the people that are doing that negotiation are not having to keep up that relationship. And that's, I've had that happen actually a number of times. So like, yes, negotiating is important, always do it, but I think you also need to be fair to all parties when doing it. And then like, that's my lesson learned, is like, you have to keep a good relationship with people.
Makes sense.
It's a really good point.
Mhm.
That actually reminds me of an old horror story from years and years ago. I was in a project. The scope had exploded dramatically. We were in a fixed fee. We didn't do a great job of managing the fact that the scope was exploding. But we finally okay, like this is clearly outside of the original requirements. We are going to put together a change order for this new functionality that they've requested. Put the change order together, brought it to the customer. Now, I was not in this meeting, but as I understand it, in the meeting, the customer was very aggressively negotiating, was basically saying like, you need to sign this thing that you're going to do it at this like half price or whatever. And if you walk out of this room without signing it, then we're going to do whatever. We're going to cancel the whole project. We're never going to pay you. I don't even know what it was. And like the person from my organization who was in there was like, I don't even have signing authority. Like there's nothing. And they're like, it doesn't matter. Like you need to commit to this now, or like you're out. So they were like, okay, sign the paper. And then the customer like proceeded to brag after that about how he had gone through some negotiation course and knew how to negotiate and whatever. And I can assure you the relationship with that customer was toxic thereafter.
I was gonna say that does not sound good.
No,
That's
no, it
terrible.
was just bad news all around.
So talking about scope going like crazy, and then Liz, you talked about this earlier too with like projects just in general. One of my horror stories I will share is got to the end of like this, I don't know, 4-month, 5-month long project. I was actually, I'm not going to say when and where it was. Got to the end of this project, and we're meeting with all of the stakeholders at the end of it. And, you know, we had done our due diligence, right? We thought we'd come up with the scenarios, built the system. And like during the go live meeting, like while everything was like getting put into the production, they go, well, what about this one scenario? Yeah, totally just killed that project. Like all the great work we had done, like everything, because then it was like, you guys didn't do enough like scoping, you didn't do enough requirements, like you didn't ask enough questions.
You couldn't just add that one thing in?
No, because it was like a completely different process. Like it was like, well, what happens when it was an exception? So my next lesson is you have to build to the rule, not to the exception. But the other thing is to overshare. Like tell things even if you don't think it's important, but like what they were asking for was so far out of like anything that was part of the project, but they said it was now vital, but it had never come up before. So I think that, making sure that you do requirement gathering, but also like overshare and don't build to the exception, and be reasonable with that.
Yeah, and you might have done a perfectly fine job with requirements gathering too, and like that just didn't come up. Like you can't force someone to tell you something.
Right, because you also don't know what question to ask that like to make them answer with that, because you don't know it's there.
You can try, but like you can still miss something if you don't know the business. Yeah, so like some things you just can't totally prevent, no matter how good of a job you do.
It's true.
That's probably the
That
one
happened.
that sticks with me.
That happened too. I was told, no, they all work like this. So then they made it so that they all worked like that. Oh, they all work like that if they're this type, but this other type works this way. Oh, okay, so these are the only 2 rules? Yeah, that's it. Made 2 rules. Oh, but it's not handling these other ones properly. I went through this like 4 or 5 times.
That's
like
crazy.
Different categories of things. I think perhaps in that case that could have been active obfuscation by the customer, but it's hard to tell.
Yeah.
Okay, how about projects that try to do waterfall and agile at the same time?
A Wagile project?
Yeah.
Oh, I do hope our good friend who talks about Wagile listens to this episode.
But that happens a lot where like they say they're one or the other, but they're really mixing both together. And then there's just really no clarity on like, when are you choosing which? Like which part of which process, like which framework?
Yeah. So I've had a lot of people or whatever companies come to me and say that they work in an agile, and then I get a Microsoft project file back with how the project's gonna get rolled out. And I was like, this is an agile. Like, I'm just want to tell you right now. And they're like, no, but like this is phase 1, and then we'll do phase 2. And I'm like, right, the phase 1 should be broken up into sprints, and we're gonna talk about what we're gonna accomplish. Well, we're gonna accomplish all of this in phase 1. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So yeah, no, that happens. They think they're agile because they're breaking it up into phases. I've seen that happen a lot.
Yeah.
On the other side, I see lots of customers who are like, no, we work agile. And you're like, okay, cool, you work agile. And they're like, but where's our requirements documentation? But what is the exact scope that I'm going to get for this price? But like, what about this document? What about that time? And like, but I thought you guys were agile. Like, these things don't go together.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, happens all around.
Mm.
Pick your poison, people. There's no such thing as Wagile.
Well,
And
there
it's
is,
obviously
it's just not effective.
It's just waterfall is what it is. It's waterfall with a bad name.
It's waterfall with a better name. Joking, Marilyn.
Yeah. Anything else on the list?
Liz, do you have like just a
No.
horror story, like something that just went so horribly wrong? And
That I can share on the podcast without giving anything away. Actually, you share something else. I'll see if I can think of something.
yeah, I mean, so this is probably, so like the one I just told you, like as a consultant, that's probably the one that like sticks with me the most. But like as the end user admin, and again, I'll try to like not share as much as I can to not give it away, but I was working in an on-prem environment, and we were 2016 on-prem going to D365 on-prem. And it was very early in the process of when you could do that. And so there was just a very around the table lack of knowledge on our side, on the vendors. It appeared that way. I don't want to like call anybody out, but that is the only project where like I got so angry. I like slammed my hands down on a oak table, like oak wood table, and I had bruises because I just like something about it, like just I don't even remember what pushed me over the edge, but I was like, and I was like taking calls while like in tears because like things were just, it was that project like almost made me like switch careers. Like I remember that one. I will never forget that project. So I guess I don't know if I really have a lesson learned on that. That is I guess I would want people to know that like we all go through
We've all
horrible
been ready
projects.
to quit before.
Yeah, exactly. Like we've all been to that point of like, why did I decide to do this with my life? And so you're not alone. So, call someone or, join a user group. Those are great places to get those out. But yeah, I think it's important to know that you're not alone when that happens. So
like shouldn't be that frustrating either. Like we are not doing open heart surgery. Like no one's life is on the line, at least for the vast majority of systems I've worked with. Like they're not usually ERP where they're like business critical, like if you're using it for a true kind of traditional CRM. And so like to be that frustrated or that upset over something that you will get through, it will be fine. You're not going to cripple the business. Like the world's not ending. Like I've been there too, where you're just like, you're so frustrated or you're so angry or whatever, but like, you really don't need to be. And like all that stuff, like it's either preventable or probably not your fault either, depending on
or
the situation.
it'll work itself out.
Yeah, it works. Or just tomorrow it'll be better or in a week it'll be better.
It's so easy to say that, but when you're caught up in that moment, it's like everything is on the line.
So an example, this week I was frustrated because my dev and my prod had gotten upgraded and my QA had not. And so there was a new dependency where I couldn't promote the solution. And I talked to the architect above me and he's like, open a ticket with Microsoft. I'm like, oh, I really don't want to do that because that's just so unenjoyable. I just said, I'll worry about it tomorrow. It was fixed. So just waiting a day solved the issue.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
That's actually
Sometimes
a good
it's
lesson.
true. Like just waiting is a good idea.
Sometimes you just have to wait and it'll work itself out.
But I could have spent the whole night with Microsoft support and like only been maybe a few hours ahead of just waiting, and it just resolving itself.
Yeah.
I wish my on-prem upgrade would done the same. I could have just walked away and it was just all resolved itself at the end. That'd been great.
Only.
So I have maybe two more things. I find it very frustrating when there's something that's very poorly documented. Like if you've not done it before, either it's an ISV or Microsoft, and there's just either no documentation or like nothing online, like no resources, or it's incorrect. Like I've definitely had incorrect guides given to me before, and like that's super frustrating. And again, nothing you can do about it. And then I guess my last story is like a terrible travel story for consulting. But before I share that, Merlin, do you have anything else on your list?
I do. The last horror story / lesson learned that I can think of is if you're not ready to go live, don't force it. Please don't force it.
True.
Don't force it to go live on time.
Don't force it to go live because that's the deadline that you set if it's not actually ready to go. I did have a project do that once. The key stakeholder, the customer said, well, this is when I promised it was going to be ready, so we're going live on this day. We said, but it's not actually ready yet, and he did not care. So we went live, and for the next 4 to 6 months, we were trying to fix the system while also trying to fix the business processes as they happened live in the system. So like every 2 weeks, they needed to do this giant process to process a bunch of like payroll data essentially through CRM. And every week something would break. And so then we'd have to go back and try to fix that run, plus then still try to work on advancing the system to the point where it wouldn't break every single time. And it was like triple the work. The data was always like being wrong, having to get deleted and rerun. And then sometimes you miss deleting some things. So then you end up with weird data in there. It was a nightmare. If it's not ready to go live, please don't force it to go live.
And that sounds like business critical, like mission critical type of processes too.
Yes.
Where you really want those to work.
You kind of need payroll to run the way that it's
Oh my
supposed to run.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's a flip side of that too. Like I've seen projects take years to go live because they wanted everything in the first phase. So I think it's a happy medium of don't go live if you're not ready, but don't try to get everything in the first phase and then take a super long time to go live.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. All right, what's your travel story?
Okay, so I flew out to upstate New York in the winter. Merlin knows this story. We were working. Everyone's gonna know. Yeah. But I got there and it was a blizzard and it was supposed to be a training. And like one of the 15 people that were supposed to show up for the training showed up because no one came in because it was blizzarding. So I flew all the way out there to basically not do what I was supposed to do. And then my flight got canceled. And I needed to get back because I had to drive from Minnesota to Wisconsin the next day. And so I ended up driving from New York to Philly with a coworker and getting a red eye out of Philly, getting home, and then literally repacking my bags and driving all the way then to Milwaukee on like 3 hours of sleep. It was horrible. It was very.
You also had to go to Philly. That sounds awful too. No offense to anybody
it was
listening
dark
to Philly.
and snowing, and so yeah. I mean, it's not like I saw Philly. That's the only time I've been there. But yeah,
Easy.
not pleasant. It was one of the things that I'm like, I want to be done traveling.
Yep, that makes sense. Here, I thought you'd bring up the time you got rejected from Canada and had to sit in a dark room doing training for 5 days. But
Oh yeah. Yeah. I didn't want to throw an employer under the bus that badly. It turns out
Well, now it's done.
you need a work visa to work in Canada, and that line to customs is not a good idea. I'm clearly not.
That's
a
the
good
lesson
liar.
learned today. I think the lesson from our podcast today is don't lie to customs.
Yeah, it was not pleasant. They just sent me back, and then I had to do the whole week-long training virtually starting on Memorial Day. So I also didn't get my 3-day weekend because they were Canadian and they didn't care that Monday was a holiday.
In their
Good
defense,
times.
we don't take off Canada Day. So
It's true. And I had not prepped it to be a virtual training too. So there's a big difference between doing an in-person and a virtual. And so it wasn't even very fun or good because I had no time to convert it into a virtual format.
Yeah.
It was a long week.
all right. Any final thoughts as we wrap up? No?
no.
No.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for listening to our horror stories. And if I feel like we should put the disclaimer on here that all characters and representations are fictitious, and any similarities to actual people or events is purely circumstantial.
Yeah.
Agreed.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Dynamics Hot Dish podcast. For additional content and previous episodes, check out our website at dynamicshotdish.com, follow us on Twitter at dynamicshotdish, and subscribe to our podcast for notifications. Thanks. See you next time.